what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven. I am your host, as always. And joining me tonight are my guys, Tyler and Alex. Alex, we'll start with you, man. I imagine you've had a bit of a stressful day watching Rafa Nadal in the tennis tournament. So how's it going, and how did Rafa do today?
Well, on one hand, it's stressful because he played a 5-hour match and had all these injuries and won. But on the other hand, I'm on summer vacation and I spend a day watching 5 hours of tennis. So it couldn't have been that stressful. And that's how you know I'm on summer vacation.
Yeah, exactly right. So we gotta get Alex that 22 Nadal Chargers jersey that Brandon Staley was holding up the other day.
Yes, we do.
Tyler's here as well, man. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. I would never watch 5 hours of tennis, let alone 5 hours for one person, one match. But all the power to you. I'm excited for this episode. Although at some point today, I realized that look at all these trades that they could do, and maybe this and that, and I just realized it ain't gonna happen. But
no, it never does.
It'll still be fun to talk about it.
Yeah, I remember last offseason trying to talk ourselves into an Orlando Brown trade. And thank God that never happened because we ended up with Rashawn Slater instead. So always fun to talk about trade ideas. And we'll kind of give a backstory of what inspired this. Of course, Baker Mayfield has a new home today as well, being traded to the Carolina Panthers for a conditional 5th-round pick. So that's where Baker Mayfield's market was, a potential franchise quarterback going for a 5th-rounder after the Panthers traded a 2nd, 4th, and a 6th for Sam Darnold. So good stuff there.
Does Sam
Imagine
Darnold
how much better he would have been if he just read
in...
the Chargers playbook.
Does Sam Darnold have the best job in the NFL? He gets to be a backup quarterback for $18 million. I feel like that's Chase Daniel.
What they're paying him? Good God.
It's Chase Daniel on steroids.
Because he's on there. Him and Baker are both on the 5th-year option. They're from the exact same draft class.
Well, and I saw something on Twitter today. They can sign Rosen and complete the 2018 Infinity Gauntlet.
Yeah, so very interesting debacle going on up there in Cleveland, as is kind of the norm. So,
yep.
Today we are going to talk about some potential pre-training camp trade scenarios or ideas, I guess you could call them. And then we're also going to kind of go up and down each AFC West division rival and talk about some potential weaknesses, potential areas that the Chargers and other teams could exploit throughout the season. So should be a fun conversation. First and foremost, we'll talk about the trade ideas. And, this was kind of inspired by Bleacher Report talking about the Chargers potentially trading for Mekhi Becton. So we had this kind of idea a few weeks ago, and then I was still on vacation, and then we wanted to talk about a bunch of other things. So we will talk about pre-training camp trade scenarios, since training camp is about 3 weeks away. And we'll start there with Mekhi and kind of talk about, where he's at, what kind of trade value he has. And then each of us are going to bring 2 different trade ideas to the table. So Tyler, we'll start with you. Where are you at with potentially trading for Mekhi Becton? Because I know that this is something that a lot of Chargers fans, of course, have debated. We debated the Orlando Brown thing for a long time. We debated lots of right tackle options here. For what it's worth, Mekhi Becton has said this offseason that he's been working at the right tackle spot with Duke Manyweather down in Dallas. So he is open to changing. The Jets do have George Fant, who also can kind of give them some flexibility. So where are you at with potentially trading for Mekhi Becton?
I'm of the mindset that if he's healthy and he's fine and everything checks out with Duke, then I don't really see why you wouldn't at this point. Again, I don't know anything about his medicals. I know Duke on Twitter is consistently fighting for him that, yes, he's here, he's showing up, he's working out. So I'm going to assume everything is okay. The Chargers have really gone out of their way to try to take players that don't have a significant injury history or anything that really would take them out for a significant amount of time. Slater had the back thing, but that was kind of a non-issue and has so far been a non-issue. Look, the Chargers are a very, very good team, except for like 3 very obvious, terrible, glaring holes on their roster. One of them is right tackle. And look, we were desperate for anything. We would have taken Moses on a $4 million contract, a $3.5 million contract, whatever it was.
Yes.
Anything else. So, is Becton better than Norton? Yes. Therefore, I would love to have him on the roster. And that's kind of how simple it is for me. If everything checks out and we're not getting another Balaga situation, I don't see the downside really.
Yeah. It would be an interesting trade. I'm curious what his value is at this point.
Right.
What was the trade compensation in that Bleacher Report article?
It was a future second round pick and then a future day 3 pick. So I believe it was basically a 2022 or 2023, excuse me, second rounder and then a 2024 like 5th or 6th or something like that.
Ooh, second rounder is kind of an awful lot. I'm not against it if it's the right compensation, but at the same time, I'm curious how much leverage the Jets have in this scenario because, I mean, right now as it stands, he's currently kind of a cut candidate on their team based on the reporting so far. So if there's a chance, and obviously it depends on how the preseason goes, that the Jets do move on from him, then like, do you just kind of wait till he hits free agency if you're the Chargers, or do you want to like lock him down now and spend compensation next year? There are other tackle options I think I would pursue first before I go for Becton, and I'll mention one of them in my trade scenarios. But I wouldn't mind Mekhi Becton for the same reasons Tyler said, as long as you have a higher ceiling this year than Storm Norton and Trey Pipkins.
Yeah.
Then and going forward, because he's under contract for one more year after this one, then I think that would be a decent investment for the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, from a trade perspective, right? Like, I think if you are looking at it from a perspective that you're potentially getting a franchise right tackle, you are not necessarily giving up a ton because he has been injured. There's always been the weight issues, perceived weight issues, I should say. Although Duke has always said that it's a kind of a non-starter. So if you're potentially giving up a second rounder and then a future day 3 pick, then, I think you have to consider that, of course. But, there's a lot of risk here involved. And I think, the Chargers offensive line coach situation kind of remains to be seen. Obviously, we know what we have in Sean Surratt after a year of him being with the Chargers and hearing from O'Day and some of the other players in press conferences how much they value and respect him. But Brendan Nugent is only a second-year offensive line coach. He's mostly been an assistant up until last year, which the Saints were kind of devastated by injuries, and then this year will be his second year. So there is some risk there, just from a Chargers standpoint and a coaching staff standpoint. Of course, Mekhi Becton would be a potential upgrade over what the Chargers have. I would kind of have to really try and negotiate that trade cost down for me. But you are talking about a player who only gave up 23 pressures as a rookie, although his pass blocking efficiency rating was not great. I want to say it was like 96.2, which was in the 50s out of qualified tackles that season. So still a lot of refinement that needs to happen from Mekhi Becton. There's an injury history. There's weight loss issues. So I think it's a good idea in theory, obviously, but I would need more information before I would be in favor of that trade or not.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
So Alex said he has an offensive tackle. I have an offensive tackle. Tyler,
oh, please don't take mine. Someone's gonna take it. Okay, somebody go.
Okay, so like I said, each of us are going to give 2 other trade scenarios or trade ideas that we could float around and discuss. It's all 3 of us have an offensive tackle, and so kind of gives you a sight to an insight into where we're at. So Alex, we discussed a little bit on Messenger today about a certain tackle. I'm wondering if that person is the player that you chose to talk about here.
Yeah, I mean, it's the 15th year of Andre Dillard trade rumors. I just think it makes a lot of sense for the Chargers. Obviously, he's kind of naturally played left tackle, and so you would have to switch him over to right, but he's played some snaps at right tackle before. Last year on 340 snaps, he gave up 20 pressures and a sack, which, I mean, at 5% pressure rate, that is much better than what you're getting out of Norton and Pipkins, obviously. And you really have him for a year. And depending on what you want to do on right tackle in the future, you can either kind of re-sign him based on the year, or you can kind of let him walk for a comp pick, right? So to me, it makes a lot of sense. I don't think the Eagles would be asking for much more than a day 3 pick, probably. With 1 year left on his deal, plug him in as a starter. And I think based on the season he had last year, on a pretty decent sample size, even though he wasn't a starter, you feel much better about that spot. I believe he had a 65 run blocking grade and 70s in the pass blocking category as well on PFF. And so I think he's just really solid and would raise what the floor of this offensive line is. And then you don't have to have any conversations necessarily about moving Matt Filer over. You can just start him next to Zion Johnson. And I think it would be a pretty seamless fit. Obviously, we talked about the switching positions thing from left tackle to right tackle. But, I think it works out for both teams. Eagles get a late day 3 pick. Chargers don't have to go through the Norton Pipkins experiment and get a relatively proven commodity. And then, based on how things work out in the future, they can kind of play it out from there. But I think it kind of makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, I would agree there. Remind me again, what was the connection between Staley and Sirianni? Wasn't there some sort of little connection that they had, or was it the defensive coordinator?
He's best friends with the defensive coordinator, John.
Yeah.
Gannon.
Yeah.
Okay, so that basically doesn't mean anything. Cool.
No.
I'm glad I brought it up.
I think it means a little bit, right? Like, I think you could, at least start a conversation with him. But yeah, the Eagles are obviously in an interesting situation here when it comes to the depth chart. They've got this really interesting blend of like young guys and older veterans, and so there's a couple players on their offensive line that I think could be trade targets for anyone, not just the Chargers. You could potentially talk yourself into Jack Driscoll, of course, who it kind of started in place of Brandon Brooks throughout the last couple seasons when he was injured. You can talk about Isaac Seumalo, excuse me. So those are some guards, obviously, but when it comes to Andre Dillard, I do feel like they would be okay with their depth if they would trade him. And of course, they've kind of held on to him this long, right? But I think they've kind of been in a weird spot in terms of his trade value because he hasn't played. There's always been the questions, as Kevin points out, about his play strength. Is he a left tackle? Can he play right tackle? All that good stuff. But I feel like he squashed those concerns last year, and he was able to switch sides. And I think from a purely athletic standpoint, you're talking about Tillery. Tillery in the comments. You're talking about Andre Dillard and Zion Johnson being one of the more athletic right sides of an offensive line. So I think of all of the offensive line tackle prospects that the Chargers could potentially trade for. I feel like Dillard would be my favorite one. He's not the one that I mentioned because I figured Alex would mention him, but I would definitely be in favor of exploring trade for Andre Dillard for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Steven, I want you to go the next. I don't want to go next.
Okay, so my offensive tackle, right tackle specifically, trade target is Jawan Taylor from the Jacksonville Jaguars. So
okay.
He had a very rough 2020, allowed 58 total pressures and had a 95 pass blocking efficiency. He's kind of a lousy run blocker. He was the second worst run blocker. I know I'm doing a great job selling him.
It's really great.
He was the second worst run blocker in the league in 2020 as well. But he took a nice little leap last season, despite everything around him going wrong. And so we went from 58 pressures allowed to only 34 total pressures allowed, which tied him with Billy Turner and Colton Miller for the 25th most in the league. And he had a pass blocking efficiency rating in 2021 of 97. So he jumped up essentially 2 points there and was tied with Jordan Mailata and Andrew Brown for the 20th best in the league. So he took a nice little leap to becoming a serviceable offensive tackle. The issue is that he was so bad in 2020 that they went out and drafted Walker Little in the second round last year. So they have a bit of a logjam. They obviously franchised Cam Robinson to be their left tackle this past season. So I think this is a worthwhile scenario to mention because he seems to be hitting his stride. We know how valuable that is to the Chargers. They've talked about that. throughout free agency, throughout trading, and acquiring players who are, hitting their strides as players, as opposed to being on the tail end of their careers, which is a nice change from the previous regime. But I think you're talking about a player who has not a high of an upside as Andre Dillard, I think, but he would be cheaper. You're talking about the Jaguars, who frankly need any kind of draft compensation possible. So I think you could talk yourself into him there. He is a year younger as well. He has 2 years left on his rookie contract, or 1 year, excuse me, as opposed to Dillard being on his last year on the rookie contract right now. So he has some flexibility there financially as well. So Jawan Taylor would be my choice here, just because I think it would not necessarily move the needle. I think, like I said, his ceiling is a little bit lower than Andre Dillard, but financially I think it makes a lot of sense, and you could get him for a pretty cheap pick, I feel like, as well.
I like it. Yeah, Taylor was the guy I thought I wanted at 28 or whatever, but they ended up going with Tillery. I really don't know what would have ended up being worse. I really don't. Although I suppose going to Jacksonville isn't really the best way to kick off your career.
Right. And he's had 3 different offensive line coaches, or 2 different offensive line coaches so far.
Yeah, no, that doesn't sound like a good start. Well, I'm glad you guys talked about players with names that I knew. My guy, I didn't hear about, didn't know he existed until today. He has a 0.48 RAS score. So yeah,
is this the part where like in Shark Tank where Mark Cuban like pretends to write on a piece of paper? Wow, 0.48 RAS.
Yeah, so yeah, pretty good. It's James Hurst, the tackle from New Orleans.
Yeah.
A guy that I didn't know he existed, but now they do have Ramczyk and they do have Penning. Now, do I think Penning will start and dominate day one? Not really, but you do have a first-round pick invested in him, and at some point he does need to see the field. Would they get rid of Hurst? Probably not, but you never know. Now, he does have 2 years left on his deal, so he'll be a 2024 free agent, but it only costs about $3 million a year over the next 2 years, which is fine because you can get out of that contract by the time Herbert's new money starts kicking in. To me, like almost any tackle name you could bring up to me, I'll take 18 pressures and 1 sack in true pass sets over 48 pressures and 8 sacks in true pass sets. Granted, on 200 more blocking reps for Norton, but still. So, Hurst's pass blocking efficiency on true pass sets is 96.1. Norton's was 91.4. So I'll take that because that's an upgrade. So you have your connection to Lombardi, to Nugent, to Will Clapp as well. He's a known commodity to those people. It does give you some stability. He's played 2,000 left tackle snaps, 1,500 left guard snaps, 800 right tackle snaps. He played all 4 spots just this past year. So there's something you can do there. Is he an exciting name? No, but I am desperate for anything that's better than the project failures so far that have been Pipkins and Norton. And people keep telling me to have faith. I can't with these two, but I will be praying for it, and I'll be there in the stands week 1 cheering as one of these guys probably blocks Crosby or whatever for 70 snaps a game again. But man, I'd love an upgrade. And James Hurst is a guy I've never heard of before. He's an older veteran with a 0.48 RAS score, but by golly, him at football, it's still better than Norton and Pipkins, and I will take anything at this point.
Yeah, from a skill set perspective and from a production perspective, he kind of has a lot of similarities to like a Billy Turner kind of player. I'm not super familiar with what Billy Turner's RAS score is. I would imagine it's a lot higher than 0.48, but hey, he's turned it. He's turned that weakness into a pretty successful NFL career. So I would be in favor. I thought about mentioning here Landon Young from the Saints as well. He's kind of more of another project, so that's kind of why I went with Jawan Taylor, who we've seen obviously a lot more production and film on. So Landon Young, I think, could be potentially somebody to keep an eye on. Like if the Saints decide to only keep the 3 offensive tackles and they cut Landon Young, maybe the Chargers kind of put a waiver claim in there and bring him in for a practice squad spot. But the Saints obviously a connection to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go back to Tyler here. We'll circle back the other way around. So Tyler, who is your second trade target here?
I'll throw an honorable mention because it'll never happen, but it's the greatest idea that will never happen. It's Dalton Reisner. Apparently, everyone's thinking of shipping him for some reason.
Interesting.
Broncos Wire, had the Broncos trading Reisner. They're starting, Glasgow and Miners for some reason.
Sign me up, man. If he's available,
seriously,
sign me the hell up.
Yep.
Like literally everything about that is perfect, except for the fact that it's the Broncos and they would never do it, I think. But you never know. Like if you're going to get nothing for him in a year and you don't really need to start him, which is dumb, but whatever. Anyway, so that's my honorable mention, which would be amazing. It just will never happen.
Yeah.
I was going through this. There's almost nothing else outside of tackle that really seems to make any sense. I don't even really feel this makes sense, but I had to find another name. That's Darrell Henderson, the running back for the Rams.
Yeah.
And why would you trade for a running back? Dude, I don't know. But have you seen Roundtree and Kelly? So we were going to do running back rankings today, and I went through the stats and did all of that and whatnot. And Kelly and Roundtree have to be bottom 5 in every single category possible. It's almost like right tackle situation. I'll take anything. Seriously, where's Brandon Oliver? We talked about Danny Woodhead. He's 37. Yeah. I'm sure he could still play.
He's in professional golfer shape. Sign him up. Let's go.
Put James Hurst at running back.
Yeah,
we're not that desperate, Alex. We're not that desperate.
I don't know. Roundtree and Kelly, we might be.
So anyway, speaking of slow running backs, the Rams did draft Kyren Williams, who broke his foot, but he's there. They did invest a pick in Jake Funk. Of the 45 running backs that I did rank statistically, Henderson is 4th in the percent of runs over 10 yards, 12th in the frequency of runs over 10 yards, and 6th in PBE. So listen, I'm not looking for a 1,500-yard running back here by any means, but listen, I would love another piece to this. Listen, I'm sure the Rams would also love to keep Henderson as well, and they probably will, but he was mentioned in a couple of trade articles. Again, that's just speculation by fans and sites, but it is there. It's an upgrade. I'll take it. It's a mildly known commodity as well. Late day 3 pick. Have at it.
Yeah, hopefully, or potentially in this scenario, hopefully Sean McVay would throw his former guy a bone in Brandon Staley. So I like that idea. I thought about bringing up a running back as well, because I really want the Chargers to have like a third different body type, if you will, somebody that obviously gives you a little bit more explosive playability, some pass catching ability. Although Isaiah Spiller and his dad posted that video yesterday of Spiller making a nice little route and catch, but I do think the Chargers could stand to add some more receiving ability, more speed into the room. I mean, we're talking ourselves into Kevin Marks being like the potential undrafted free agent choice because he's like slightly faster than Larry Roundtree. So I think that's absolutely a good one there.
Yeah.
Alex, you want to give yours?
Oh, okay. I didn't know if we were going back around, but I'm fine with that. I'm going to go with Brandon Staley's favorite position, linebacker.
Jesus.
Okay.
Love it. Let's do it.
All right. So I went, not outside the box, but this is a guy who had an interception and a sack on Justin Herbert last year. I went with Minnesota Vikings linebacker Eric Kendricks.
Okay. That's a good play too.
Yeah.
You went for the big swing at linebacker then.
So this could be considered a big swing, but now that might seem like too good of a player, right? Like for the Chargers to go get, but here's the Vikings situation or scenario. They have $1 million in cap space available next season. And they just hired a new GM and a new coach, and are probably in a spot with Kirk where, of course, they're not bad enough to tank, and also they're not really good enough to be contenders, but they're probably going to work the middle a little bit these next 2 years. And I think, considering he's a cut candidate next year, his contract is a guaranteed or non-guaranteed $10 million. They can cut him and save. I think it's $11 million in base salary, and then they can cut him and save $10 million. So if he's already a cut candidate for them next year, in order to open up cap space, if they cut him next year, they're not going to receive any, comp pick compensation. So if you're the Chargers, you might just kind of jump in a year early. You toss him a 5th or 6th round pick, I think, in 2023, And you basically get a rental linebacker for a year, and you can decide if you like him to move forward with him next year, also at a cap hit of about $9.5 million after potential restructure. Or you can cut him and then restart fresh there. Or if Kenneth Murray takes a leap this year, I think it just gives you a lot of flexibility. So, plus we've talked about linebackers, an area where they're kind of hoping for a miracle at this point. You're hoping for a Kenneth Murray breakout season. You're hoping Troy Reader doesn't have to play too many snaps. And Kyle Van Noy obviously helps a little bit. He's going to be splitting his time between linebacker and edge in some role. But if you get a guy for a year that I think can stabilize the linebacker group for a team that is supposed to be making, a playoff run, a Super Bowl push, I think he's a guy that really stabilizes that defense, and you don't have to expect so much out of Kenneth Murray. And also, if Kenneth Murray were to get hurt again, you don't feel his loss nearly as much if Eric Kendricks is on this team. So this is a bit of a big swing, especially when you're adding, a $10 million player, I guess, so close to training camp. But the Chargers can certainly absorb that cap hit, at least right now. And they have plenty of options next year, depending on what you want to do. I just think he's easily also would be their best coverage linebacker. They don't really have those as the roster stands right now. Drew Tranquil, kind of okay in coverage, but everyone else is pretty spotty in that regard. So not that I'm expecting the Chargers linebackers to go full Gus Bradley and be matched up on Marquez Valdez-Scantling all the time. But I do think you need linebackers to cover. I think you just need a stabilizing force in the linebacker group in general. Again, file this under, I don't think this is going to happen. One, because he's a linebacker, and two, because Telesco's probably not going to give up that capital. But I thought it was interesting, just given the position the Vikings are in and the fact that they're probably going to move on from him next year anyway, considering their financial situation. You can kind of entice them, give up a pick, and in return get a really solid linebacker, and suddenly that position doesn't seem like nearly as much of a problem anymore.
No, Eric Kendricks would be by far their best linebacker, and even if he's on the decline, like I have been rewatching last season, mostly focusing in on Joey Bosa because I wanted to watch Bosa and Mac, but you're watching other positions, of course, as things unfold, and the linebacker play and the potential for next year or this upcoming season, of course, is not great. So the Chargers really need Drew Tranquil to be healthy, and they really need Kenneth Murray to find his stride, or they could be in some big trouble. And low key, I feel like there is an argument to be made that the linebacker position is more of a concern on the roster than right tackle is, because you can hide right tackle a little bit more than linebacker. So they really are in a tough spot from that perspective if Kenneth Murray does not figure it out. So I totally get that. $10 million, I would assume you're probably asking Minnesota to take some of that cap on for this season, similar to how the Browns are doing with Baker Mayfield, which is just kind of hilarious. But I think this team could absolutely stand to add another linebacker if Brandon Staley actually liked linebackers.
Yeah, there definitely is that. I don't, like you said, I file that under things that won't happen for sure. But still, like, if we're just talking about it as something that could happen, Staley did reach out to, I believe, Harrison Smith to ask about Ficken. And I believe if you have Ryan Ficken on your team now, so there is some connection there. Again, Staley preaches known commodities, and I suppose in some way that helps you. But yeah, I just, it almost feels like something that they would do if he's still on the Vikings next year, maybe, because then you could trade for him. Although it's an $11.4 million cap hit, and then let him walk after that. I feel like they're going to do the, if it doesn't pan out with Murray, they're going to do the same thing like they did with Tillery, where it's like, we're going to give him a year, we'll let him see what happens, and then we can kind of bring in a Morgan Fox type. Now, Kendricks would be more than a Morgan Fox type if you trade for him, but I don't know. But like you said, file it into things that won't happen, but they do desperately need a linebacker. I just didn't look at any linebacker trades because I just think they're stuck with what they have.
Sure. I think that's fair. All right. So my trade target that I wanted to bring up today, like I mentioned, I thought of a few players. I typed up notes on a few players, and I ultimately settled on Mr. Darius Slayton of the New York Football Giants. He's a wide receiver, of course. He is on the final year of his rookie contract, so he is pretty cheap. He's he got a cap hit this year of $900,000. I think he is a restricted free agent after this year for some reason. I don't know if the Giants cut him at some point or whatever. According to SpotRack, according to Over the Cap, he's under contract next year as well for $2.5 million. So again, not super sure what's on the books there, but Brad Spielberger mentioned him as a possible training camp cut because the Giants wide receiver room is I don't want to say stacked. That's the wrong word because they're not any good players. But they've invested a lot of other resources in the wide receiver position. They, of course, have Kenny Galladay. They extended Sterling Shepard, and they drafted Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson in the past 2 off seasons. So it's been a busy wide receiver transaction center as opposed to it being like good receiver room, but it's been busy. So not necessarily a sure role for Darius Slayton. And the Giants are in rebuild mode, right? Like we know that they have made some cuts. Of course, James Bradberry being the most notable one. And their financial situation next year is not great. So the Giants would only save $2 million. But if you're talking about flipping a conditional 5th round pick or 6th round pick or something like that, I feel like a rebuilding team like the Giants would take that on. So from a play perspective, of course, had a great rookie season for him, had 740 yards, 8 touchdowns. Everybody was kind of expecting him to take a bigger leap in year 2, and then ultimately didn't happen. Did struggle with some drops and things like that. But he had the 15th highest ADOT in the league last year. Still a very effective deep threat. He was a low 4.4 guy coming out in the draft. So I think his long-term financial flexibility that the Chargers would gain, you're not necessarily taking on a huge cap hit. You know, we kind of messaged back and forth about Robbie Anderson today after the Panthers traded for Baker Mayfield, but he has a big cap hit over the next 2 years. He's also flirted with retirement. So Darius Slayton is a potential, not long-term, but short-term replacement for Jalen Guyton because he's under contract next year as well. And at that point, you know, you're paying $2.5 million for your deep threat. If he has a great season with Justin Herbert, then you're talking about comp pick potential there as well. So I think that's a low risk, high reward deal for somebody to potentially challenge Jalen Guyton for the role of deep threat. If not, you have your Jalen Guyton replacement for next year.
It's so hard to judge because the numbers are, especially this past year, not great. And like, if you just look at the numbers as a player on the decline, but it's tough when one person has Daniel Jones and whatever the heck they had like in and out of the lineup last year, and one has Justin Herbert. Don't like that the drop rate is significantly worse than Guyton's.
Yes.
Yes. I want to see. I mean, I would prefer to just see Guyton get the shot because I feel like he's a player that's on the ascent, and I feel like Slayton. But again, different quarterbacks. I'm not feeling it. But that's just numbers, and which don't always tell the whole picture.
Yeah. I feel like Darius Slayton is kind of one of those better in theory than he is in reality players sometimes. And, you know, there is a bit of a, obviously a salary cap. I mean, what he would bring to this team for that value is fine. Yeah, I just kind of like Tyler. I don't think there's a massive difference between him and Jalen Guyton, and you can argue that Guyton certainly kind of is the better deep threat. But yeah, the Giants wide receiver room is interesting. You know, figure out what to do with Kadarius Toney as well, which they still haven't figured out.
Yeah,
make a decision on Daniel Jones. So good luck.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, if you're talking to me about adding a receiver, like again, like I think you have 3 or 4 really good wide receiver options. So if you're adding one, I feel like again you kind of need to add, you know, a different kind of body type than you have on the roster. And the Chargers, outside of Guyton, don't really have a speed threat. So Marquez Callaway was another one I kind of wrote some notes on from the Saints. Mm-hmm. There's that connection there. Again, not necessarily an upgrade over Jalen Guyton, but he would at least give them a second speed option. So some interesting options there. We have seen Tom Telesco trade for a wide receiver mid-season. Of course, it was Dontrell Inman, so take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. But hey, man, it has happened before.
Did he trade for him or traded away?
I think he did both, didn't he? Didn't he trade him away and then trade for him?
I think he signed him later. I think he was just available. Okay. I might be wrong on that. I'm not sure.
All right.
Well, while Tyler
there's been wide receiver movement, and the word trade was involved for sure.
I know there has been a trade acquisition with Dontrell Inman. I thought that he traded him to Chicago and then traded for him when he was with like Washington or something like
Maybe. That. I don't remember. I have a wide receiver who will cost $0 in 2022, but $11 million in 2023. Calvin Ridley for a 5th or 6th round pick. You stash him away and then you bring him in. He promises not to gamble anymore. And then suddenly you probably have the best trio in football. Not going to happen, but
I mean, as far as character concerns go, it's certainly not the worst thing that you could.
Yeah.
You know,
I think gambling were better than stealing a bike.
I'll need a presentation on that one. I don't know yet.
Well, yeah. We'll debate.
So NV Talent asking about running back situation. Of course, we were talking about the Giants. He wants to know what we would think about targeting Saquon.
What's his? This is the last year of his deal, right? It's his 5th year.
Is he?
Yeah, because he was in the same. Old? He was in the same draft with Darnold and Mayfield. So what's his 5th year option? I don't know what the money is.
Let me look.
I will say that he didn't make the top 10 of running backs. Now, granted, he played for the Giants and he played hurt and all that, yada yada.
Yeah.
Of the 45 running backs I have ranked, he's 43rd. So probably not.
Yeah.
So he's currently on the 4th year of his rookie deal. He has next year would be his 5th year option. His cap number this year is $10 million, and his cap number next year is 7.
No, wait, this would be his 5th year option, right? It's 20.
I was just looking at over the cap, dude.
Oh, wait. Sorry. I'm trying to think through it. Yeah, no, I guess.
Wait, no, I was reading it wrong. I'm sorry. You're right. This year is his 5th year option. I'm sorry.
Yeah. How much is that for?
My mistake.
It's.
I have to bring it back up. It was loading.
Oh, 7 million.
Yeah.
Like I think if he still had high upside, it'd be one thing, but I watched more Saquon than I care to watch for because I watched more Giants than I care to admit. He just looked slower, like occasionally, even against the Chargers, like one time he cracked like one run to the outside. But I don't know, like I think his knees are kind of cooked. I mean, I could see next year in free agency if he sort of like has another middling year, like if you want to like take a chance on it, but I probably would not give up draft capital for him, especially because they already have 18 running backs on the roster as is, and you're kind of already carving out that RB2 role for Isaiah Spiller. If they didn't draft Isaiah Spiller, I think that would probably be a more serious consideration.
Yeah, that's my thing is I'm trying to find a third capable running back as opposed to adding like a Austin Eckler complement. So I did want to mention the Miami Dolphins do have kind of a deep stable of running backs set in the training camp. Mike McDaniel brought over all his old friends from San Francisco and Arizona, including Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert. So they signed Sony Michel as well, and they also have Myles Gaskin. So unless they keep all 4, but some situation to certainly keep an eye on. I feel like what would the odds be if if Larry Roundtree and Joshua Kelly kind of stink it up in training camp?
Justin Jackson?
Huh?
Oh, nothing. Trying to anticipate.
I mean, I would not be opposed to bringing Justin Jackson back, but if those two struggle, what are the odds we see them kind of explore an external addition at that point in terms of someone gets cut or bring somebody back or bring someone in who's not on a roster? I think, that's certainly something to keep an eye on for sure.
I think it's just harder now because they have Spiller at RB2. So like if Spiller were to struggle early on, then maybe that's a situation. But if Roundtree and Kelly struggle, they're kind of your RB3, and then the other one's going to be a healthy scratch. I mean, at least if you're keeping 4 running backs on the roster, it probably plays out that way. So, I mean, are you really exploring external options for your RB3 not living up to par? I mean, yeah, again, I think that's different if they just roll the dice and we're like Kelly and Roundtree are RB2 and RB3 this year, but I don't think they would do much else other than like promote Kevin Marks from the practice squad, promote Letty Brown from the practice squad if those guys aren't, showing the level of skill or effort they would like. But I mean, they're also not going to get that many opportunities just based on Spiller being here.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just pulling for the Justin Jackson reunion, just going through all his numbers and where he stacks up. He's like in the middle of all the running backs in the league last year, ahead of some guys in many categories. I mean, second in breakaway rate and third in yards per attempt. Like there's a really good rotational running back out there. Granted, he can't stay healthy, and they're just gonna let Roundtree and Kelly be the RB3, RB4s, whatever. So
I'd cut Roundtree and Kelly tomorrow and sign Justin Jackson. I would do it in a second, and then you suddenly have Neckler, Spiller, Jackson, trio, and you have Brown and Marks on the practice squad. Like I think that would be a great running back rotation. But they seem married to Kelly and Roundtree.
Yeah, I feel much better about having Justin Jackson as your RB3 because he can actually catch the ball and he's an athlete, so a good athlete, I should say. All right, so we'll move on here. We did have another segment that we wanted to talk about, and I always say this, but I didn't think we would talk about the trade situations for that long. But wanted to talk about some potential weak points of the Chargers AFC West division rivals. Of course, we're talking about the Raiders, the Broncos, and the Chiefs. And I think it's only fair that we talk about the Kansas City Chiefs first. Of course, they are kind of the class of the division. So I'll go ahead and list my group here. I'm saying the defensive line. And I think this is unlike the Chargers who do a 3-4, I think you can include defensive tackles and edge rushers here. If you want to only limit it to defensive line, that's fine with me too. I don't think the edge rushers are very good either. So really it's still kind of Chris Jones and the Jonesettes. Like there's not really anybody else in that room that I would trust if I were a Chiefs fan. And they, last year they had Jaron Reed, who's a good defensive tackle, very serviceable player to play alongside him, can rush the passer, stop the run, all that good stuff. They lost him in free agency and they didn't really replace him. So the defensive tackle room in particular for me is a big concern, would be a big concern if I am a Chiefs fan. You're also talking about it because Chris Jones doesn't necessarily stop the run at a high rate. If you watch the Chiefs on film quite a bit, he doesn't really play a ton on first down. He's more of a second and third down player, so the Chiefs can keep him fresh to rush the passer. So if you wanted to include the edge rushers here, I think that is fair, although they did draft George Karlaftis. But I think the defensive tackles specifically for the Chiefs would be a big concern. And I think they're really relying on, their linebackers to kind of make up the ground there. And they have great linebackers, as much as I hate to look at that group. So, it's not the worst idea in the world. But, Chris Jones and a bunch of scrubs is not necessarily inspiring a ton of confidence in a defensive tackle room for me.
Yeah, let me build right off of that because you and I had the same idea. I just kind of flipped it and talked about how to attack the weakness, and that's run between the tackles. The Chiefs were a team that were far better because it really goes against common logic. Like it should be that outside should be a little bit more efficient, inside should be less efficient. But the Chiefs were far better at defending outside runs. With teams having a 41% and 48% success rate off of left and right tackle. But in the middle, like you talked about with the interior defensive lineman, off of left guard, right guard, teams jump to 60 and 63% success rate. So, you have Filey, you have Lindsay, you have Zion, you have Isaiah Spiller. Eckler's success rate versus the Chiefs was actually better running inside as well. So go ham, go after it. I completely agree with your assessment of their defensive line.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how much Karlaftis contributes in the beginning because I do like him as a prospect, as an edge defender. But That that interior does not spark the most confidence outside of obviously Chris Jones, who's given the Chargers plenty of problems in the past.
Sure.
I'm going to go for a different part of their defense. Obviously, the biggest part of the I was going to say biggest part of the Chiefs offseason, then there was that whole Tyreek Hill thing. The second biggest part of the Chiefs offseason was losing Tyrann Mathieu. I don't think people talk about that quite as much as they should. And they're replacing him with Justin Reed, who was all right last year, had a better 2020 than 2021, but regressed in a couple key categories in 2021, specifically coverage. One of the lowest coverage grades of any safety last year with 45.3 on PFF. So again, that's not like the end all be all, but I, also allowed a 111.2 passer rating and a whopping 21.4 yards per reception. So he was kind of getting low-key cooked last year. And I just think taking away the veteran leadership of what Tyrann Mathieu brought to that team, how he led that defense down to down, I think that's going to take more adjustment than any of the changes the Chiefs made on offense. Obviously, people talk about them losing Tyreek Hill and that conversation and replacing him with Juju Smith and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. But I think they'll kind of be fine on offense for the most part. But like Steven said, their defensive line, combined with the fact that they lost a team leader and a defensive leader in Tyrann Mathieu, and we're replacing him with a younger, albeit a much more inexperienced and a bit of a regressing Justin Reed, I think that's a big question mark on their team.
Yeah, there's definitely exploitable weaknesses in the additions that they've had. I mean, I love Trent McDuffie, but I feel really bad for him starting as basically their CB1 in the AFC West. That sounds like a nightmare for him. There's physical limitations there. Brian Cook, love him so much, and we were all fans of him, but there's physical limitations there. Justin Reed getting older, and the numbers didn't look great either. There's limitations there. Leo Chenal in coverage. Again, loved Leo Chenal, absolutely, but there are limitations in coverage. There's some physical limitations to a lot of these guys in many ways, especially in coverage. I think the Chargers could exploit.
Yeah, I think from a Chiefs perspective, right? Like they had a clear goal in mind over the last 2 seasons that they wanted to get younger and more athletic in the back seven. And I think they have done that, right? You're talking about a linebacker trio of Willie Gay, Nick Bolton, and Leo Chenal. That's a very, very good young, high upside linebacker core. Unfortunately, I love it, and I think it's I'm very jealous of that linebacker core. So that's that, and then you have obviously Trent McDuffie, Brian Cook. They drafted Joshua Williams as well, and you're talking about Juan Thornhill, Justin Reed, kind of replacing Tyrann Mathieu and Dirty Dan Sorensen. So I think if this group is healthy, and you're talking about McDuffie and Brian Cook maybe hitting their stride a little bit, then they'll have some growing pains early on, of course, but there's no question that they are younger and more athletic. It's just a matter of how will they gel? How will Trent McDuffie handle being on an island in the AFC West, like you're mentioning, Tyler, and of course their defensive coordinator, whose name is escaping me right now. Spagnuolo, yeah, he loves to blitz, man. So McDuffie is going to have a baptism by fire as soon as he hits the field in week 1. So I think the Chiefs defense long-term is going to be better than we've seen, but this year could certainly be a bit of a struggle for them.
Yep.
All right, we'll move down to the Denver Broncos, kind of the darling of the offseason, if you will, from the media perspective. Of course, everybody loves Russell Wilson. I was listening to Colin Cowherd today while I was doing some work for this episode, and he thinks that the Broncos are the second best team in the league alongside the Buffalo Bills. So there's that. I will say there are a few different weaknesses again that I feel like you could target. If they're trading Dalton Risner, man, that offensive line is going to go from good to bad. So that's something to keep an eye on. I wrote down their safety position. I know that they have Justin Simmons, who's one of the league's best. I think he's one of the league's more underrated defensive players. But the rest of their safety room, if you will, they brought back Kareem Jackson, coming off his worst season in his career in terms of his safety play declining across the board, showing signs of athletic decline as well. And the other players behind him are Caden Stearns, who played 311 snaps last year during his rookie season. PJ Locke, who's a former Steelers undrafted free agent with 33 career snaps to his name. And then 5th round draft pick Jamar Johnson, who has 0 snaps to his name. So this group outside of Justin Simmons is old and very inexperienced. And you're talking about them trying to, adapt or kind of maintain their play in a Vic Fangio kind of scheme. You're going to be asking a lot of Caden Stearns, who's your third safety, potentially being safety 2. What's up with Jamar Johnson, PJ Locke? So I think outside of Justin Simmons, the safety group in particular is kind of where, if I'm playing the Broncos, like, I'm going at those safeties as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, I'd have to look at how some of these safeties held up last year. We've seen, even with Justin Simmons is amazing. We've seen with Derwin James, like, you have one really good safety. That's awesome. Go after the other guy. And it hasn't really worked out well for the Chargers to have. I mean, now they have Adderley, but like, there were some moments where Derwin James is fantastic, but there's only so much he can do. I wouldn't go out of my way to say that the Broncos defense or even their secondary is going to be bad, but there's a transition here. It's not quite the same. It was so successful last year. Now it won't quite be the same. There's really going to be an inexperience around this roster. It's going to take an adjustment for sure.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see how their transition goes and just how quickly they get acclimated to everything. I mean, transitioning from Vic Fangio to Nathaniel Hackett, obviously, I'm curious to see how quickly that all takes place. And I'm going to talk about their offense, not Russell Wilson. I could talk about Russell Wilson decline for hours. I do think it's going to happen. But do they really have any skill players that scare you? Like, I don't really think they do. Javonte Williams, yeah, I mean, I think he'll get his against the Chargers.
He terrifies me. I'll tell you that right now.
Javonte Williams is really
Javonte Williams is the scary one, particularly because of how the Chargers' run defense was last year. So if you do upgrade that, then, I don't think he's as much of a concern. But I don't know. Like, a lot of people talk about their offense as if it's going to explode, and I'm like, they're counting on Jerry Jeudy, who we've kind of been waiting to break out for forever. And granted, his quarterback's been Drew Lock, and his quarterback's been everybody in Denver from Teddy Bridgewater, who actually was pretty good last year by the stats. I just don't. Courtland Sutton's fine. No one would call him like a top 10 receiver though, and Russ is coming out of Seattle, constantly having 2 guys who hovered between the top 10 and top 15, and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So I think the transition from that to the weapons that he has now, Albert O is fine. They drafted Greg Dulcich, but there's no one in their wide receiver room who really scares me. And maybe I'll, take back these words 5 months from now when, Jerry Jeudy puts Michael Davis on skates or something, but I'm not really all that concerned about their weapons. I do think Russell Wilson, of course, will make them look better simply because he's better than Drew Lock. But because of how the Chargers have upgraded their secondary, because they have J.C. Jackson and all those guys, I think that in this division, you kind of need like a killer weapon, either at tight end or with your wide receivers. I think the Chiefs' wide receivers and weapons are better. I think the Raiders' weapons are overall better than the Broncos. And I think the Chargers' weapons are better as well. So I feel like the Broncos, granted it's the AFC West, the division stack, but I feel like this is weirdly one of the lesser stacked AFC West teams when it comes to offense. Russell Wilson will probably change a lot for them, and they have enough guys to get it done. I just wonder if the not having a stacked skill group kind of ends up costing them a division that's really been an arms race for, a year and a half now.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of waiting and seeing on Courtland Sutton at this point because, he did tear his ACL in 2019 or 2020, excuse me. 2021 is first season back from that. So I think he was on a trajectory to be a potential wide receiver 1 in this league. Before he tore his ACL. So I'm kind of waiting to see if he is that much better when he's another year healthy. I feel like he probably is going to be the wide receiver 1 in Denver. And Jerry Jeudy, obviously very talented, but he's got off-field issues. He's got drop issues. So that is, again, lot of potential there, but there's a lot of boomer bust potential as well. So
yeah,
really like the only one that I think could become a legitimate star is Sutton if he is able to kind of get back to his former self. But in terms of like the AFC West, like of course you're you know, a little bit more concerned obviously about the Raiders skill set and skill group with Devontae Adams and Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow. So I don't know if I would necessarily go and call it a weak point or a group that you could kind of, you know, exploit, but I get what you're saying. It's definitely a concern for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys really covered most of it. The only thing I'll really add to here is that you talk about the Russell Wilson decline. He's going to the wrong division, and this defense.
Yeah.
Like I saw everyone's comments on Arjun's post about, you know, Russell Wilson coming to the AFC West and all this cover 2 stuff, the Fangio scheme and whatnot. But you know, the Chargers should be on paper. They don't have a player who I think is as good as Aaron Donald or Jalen Ramsey in 2020. But I do think as a whole, when healthy, their defense is going to be better. And, you know, listen, where is it? Where's my stat? In 2020, Brandon Staley and Patrick Graham were responsible for 3 of Wilson's 4 worst EPA per play performances. And like, here we go. Like, we're going to see what Russell Wilson can do. And if you look at the stats, almost nobody throws it deep down the field more than Russell Wilson. And now you really have to rope that in. You can't quite do that against, you know, this Chargers defense. Fingers crossed. And, you know, and he's, you know, historically struggled against these kind of defenses. And Staley kind of seems to have his number. So I don't want to say Russell Wilson is their exploitable weakness by any means, but he's facing something that he has struggled against for sure.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the things that Russell Wilson is going to have to do is figure out how to throw the ball over the middle with this Green Bay scheme that does a lot of stick concepts, that does a lot of mesh concepts. And of course, you know, Nathaniel Hackett could kind of, you know, take those or dial those back a little bit to play to the strengths of his quarterback because he's not Aaron Rodgers at this point. But, you know, the Packers would kill teams over the middle. Of course, a lot of that due to Devontae Adams, but you know, it is going to be something to keep an eye on. So we'll move on, of course, to the Raiders. Looks like we got a Raider fan in the chat, so I'm sure he's going to be very happy with what we have to say about his team. So Tyler, we'll start with you here, and then Alice can kind of build off of your point. What's your weak point of the Las Vegas Raiders?
Like I said in my tweet, I tried very hard to not just circle the entire secondary and say that was it. But I found this little tidbit that was interesting. So Derek Carr's 3 worst EPA averages versus coverages, the only 3 that are negative from last year, were cover 3, cover 4, and cover 6. And in week 4, guess which 3 coverages the Chargers ran more than anything else? Cover 3, 4, and 6. In week 18, they used significantly more cover 3. Not sure why. I don't know who was available in week 4 versus week 18. But, you know, but it's not like everyone ran this against the Raiders and Carr struggled. In fact, you know, cover 3, you know, after cover 3, the 2 most used coverages against the Raiders were cover 1 and cover 2. But the Chargers specifically against Carr ran the most 3, 4, and 6. It just so happens that Carr is the worst over the whole year against those. So it's more of an interesting tidbit and a weakness that I think I'll have to look at how the Chargers, you know, if you asked me gun to my head what the Chargers ran, I don't think I would have given you those answers. But here we go. Like, that's what they ran against the Raiders, against Derek Carr. It succeeded. It is a different offensive coordinator. It is a different system. There are different players there. So things might obviously change, but I thought that was an interesting little stat to bring up.
Yeah, no, I think that's. We're gonna learn who Derek Carr kind of is this year. I mean, obviously we know that he's been a good quarterback and he's proven himself, but I'll be curious to see how he fares against these defenses he's going to be going against. Just particularly because all of them, kind of except his own, got better this year. So that's going to be interesting to watch. I'm going to go with their head coach, who I think is a fraud and a phony. I've said this many times.
I love it.
What does Josh McDaniels do well? I don't get the fascination with him. But the Patriots...
Get hired.
Yeah, he does get that well.
He must be a great interviewer.
Or
interviewee, I should say.
The Patriots last 3 years on offense, and this is a year, including a year where they had Tom Brady as their starting quarterback, 25th, and 26th, respectively, in offense in the NFL. This is the guy who's supposed to like figure out the Raiders now. Maybe he doesn't have to do so much, right? Like you have Darren Waller there, you have Derek Carr, you have Hunter Renfrow. Perhaps it ends up just not being that difficult, but the Patriots offense has been stuck in the mud for longer than I think people talk about. And also, this is a guy who, at his last coaching job, or his last head coaching job, I should say, was caught in a cheating scandal. And after he was caught in the cheating scandal, suddenly forgot how to coach, and the Broncos started losing games. I don't know. I thought he was a really interesting hire by them. And I guess they're trying to recreate Patriots West out there. Good luck in your mission. But I think that the Raiders kind of had a good thing going. Obviously, after firing John Gruden, they got better as an offense and overall as a team statistically, and then decided to fire that coaching staff and bring in an unproven one. It's Mark Davis's team. He can do whatever he wants with it. I guess thanks for firing the people who brought you some success. But if I'm a Raiders fan, I would be pretty concerned at the Josh McDaniels hire. And I'm confident in Derek Carr and what they can do on offense, but I don't think that they've really brought in any offensive guru who I think is going to elevate them to the level of where the Chargers have been at, or, you know, a good enough offense to compete with the Chiefs, aside from a few shootout games. And then, as Tyler mentioned, in conjunction with their, you know, lack of an offensive focus with their coach, their defense is really bad, and it's clearly the worst one in the AFC West. So I think Josh McDaniels combined with their defense, it's why, in theory, I would actually like to pick the Broncos to finish in fourth because of the discussion we just had, but I think I would pick the Raiders.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Offensively, I think the Raiders will still be very, very good. I mean, Josh McDaniels is probably a very poor manager of a locker room, but I still feel like from an offensive schematic standpoint, like he's going to play to Derek Carr's strengths. And again, they have arguably the best supporting cast in the league around him, with, you know, Davante Adams, Darren Waller, who's top 3 tight end. Hunter Renfro's been 1,000-yard receiver. So I think their offense will be fine. I think it's going to be highly volatile because their offensive line is atrocious outside of Colton Miller. And that is certainly a group that I think could certainly be a weak point to target. I kind of figured that you guys would take secondary and offensive line off the board, so I didn't prepare for that. I'm just saying run defense, because I think we all kind of overvalued a little bit how, you know, smart Brandon Staley was and how much of a good scheme that he's going to bring. And everybody's just going to kind of pick the scheme right up, and it's going to be a seamless transition, and the defense is going to be good. There's Derwin James, there's Joey Bosa, there's obviously we kind of talked ourselves into Kenneth Murray, you know, heading into the season. That didn't go well. And then, you know, it turns out that a lot of these guys who are career Gus Bradley players have a hard time transitioning to a very complex scheme. Of course, some of that is pass defense, and a lot of that is run defense. And I think the Raiders are going to go through a very similar transition. I think Max Crosby is a fantastic player. I think he's great against the run. I think he's a great pass rusher, of course. But outside of him, I don't necessarily know if they have like any other elite dudes. I love Denzel Perryman. I wish I could tab him as an elite linebacker, but he just cannot stay healthy. Even last year, he played 13 games. So you're going down a depth chart of Bilal Nichols, Jonathan Hankins, Vernon Butler, and then the 2 rookies that they drafted, Matthew Butler and Neil Farrell, who I like, and I'm excited, you know, about their future. And then, you know, alongside Denzel Perryman, you have Jayon Brown or Divine Diablo or Kenny Young. There's just a lot of uncertainty there, a lot of moving parts after being in a very easy Gus Bradley scheme where it's see ball, get ball. And now you're having a lot of moving parts, a lot of different play calls, a lot of different moving personnel packages. And they don't really have like a truly dominant run defender in the middle to kind of stabilize things. And that's something that the Chargers had a big time struggle with, which ultimately led them to having one of the worst run defenses in the league. And I think the Raiders are going to be in for a similar transition, especially because teams are going to try and keep Derek Carr, Davante Adams, Darren Waller off the field and run the ball. So I think that's kind of the area that I would focus on.
Yeah, it's a good call. I mean, what a awful run defense the Chargers started out with, kind of mildly got better, but then finished terribly with literally right down to the last game. So yeah, I'm curious how they will transition. You're right. I didn't really think about that. We went from Bradley to different scheme. They went from Bradley, granted not as heavily invested in his scheme because it was 1 year with the team, but
right.
But
it was all Gus's dudes. It was Darius
That's true. It was
Philon
actually
and
just the
Quinton
Chargers
Jefferson
player.
and
Yeah.
Denzel and all these guys, right?
Yeah.
And like Darius Philon was probably their best defensive tackle last year, if not, it was Quinton Jefferson. So I don't know, man. Like I think the Raiders defense is going to be in for a bit of a regression, like similar to how we saw. And we talked about the other day when the edge rusher rankings came out from Jeremy Fowler. Chandler Jones, I think, is really making a lot of money off of that first game against Tennessee. Outside of that week 1, he was pretty mediocre last year. So I don't know. Like I think you should be selling your stock on the Las Vegas defense.
Yeah, I would sell my stock on them simply because I don't think they're very talented. I will say the one thing they do have going for them is the Patrick Graham hire, just because I saw what he was able to do with the Giants last year, and that was a defense that was not loaded with talent per se. I mean, obviously you had like James Bradbury, and it was probably better than what the Raiders had going into the season, but at the same time, probably not nearly as premium edge rushing talent as the Raiders have invested in. So I could kind of go either way on that. I don't think the Raiders defense is going to be good because of their secondary, but I could see it being an overall upgrade from last year simply because of the scheme change and going from a Gus defense that you kind of have to have star players to run to a defense that may play to the strengths of their players a little bit more. Obviously it's not a much more talented defense than it was last year, but I think Graham can better elevate and use those kind of like 3-4 2-man high concepts for better success. But again, time will tell on that one. I almost think they have a better defensive coach than an offensive coach. So maybe that won't matter again, like when they have Devontae Adams and clearly better talent on offense. But I almost buy their defensive philosophy a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think Patrick Graham is a fast and rising defensive coach in this league. I think was a fantastic hire for them. I just think it's going to be an adjustment, and they have some young players that I like. I think Trayvon Merrick is on his way to being a quality safety in this league. Devon Diablo is a really good sub package linebacker prospect, and then the 2 rookie defensive tackles that they drafted, I was a big fan of as well. But it's just, I think it's such a big adjustment going from Gus Bradley to this kind of diverse and versatile scheme. So I'm definitely expecting the Raiders defense to take a step back. But all right, good conversations on some trade targets. If you're just joining us live, make sure and go back and rewatch that. We talked about 7 potential trade targets for the Chargers ahead of training camp, and then just now talking about some weak points of the AFC West. So Alex, any final thoughts before we head out for the evening?
No final thoughts. The offseason continues.
The offseason does continue. Alex did do a great episode of Bold Breakdowns talking about Justin Herbert, Phillip Rivers. Of course, that conversation that Rivers had at the Senior Bowl Hall of Fame was a lot of fun to listen to. So if you missed Alex's video, please go check that out. Tyler, any final thoughts, man?
Yeah, a couple of shout outs. Tim Stewart for the $10 super chat. I guess this is one of his first times catching us live. So thank you. And then NV Talent sent in a super sticker as well for $10. Thank you so much. For anybody who's listening who didn't see it yet, or if you're not a channel member, I uploaded my part 1 of the Keenan Allen versus Mike Williams series. I watched about 400 plays through week 6, graded each one, charted them, haven't broken them down by route concept. So you can see who's best at yards per route run, per route concept, and all that sort of stuff. So that's open for Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. So go watch it if you're a member, or if you want to join up, have at it.
Yeah, and the link to both of those will be in the description of the video or the podcast episode. So go check those out. Tyler's doing some great stuff over there. I'm going to be working on a video about the Chargers pass rush, specifically Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, coming up here in a little bit. So stay tuned for that one. All right, that's going to do it for us today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks again to the fellas for the super chats today, and we'll see you guys next time.